Right, thank you everybody for coming today. So my name is Michael Grime and I am a Senior Project Manager for Trueman Change, and I will be hosting today's Change Chat. So I just want to officially welcome you to our September 2024 edition of our Change Chat. Can't believe we're in September already. The way that these work, I know I'm recognising quite a few similar names, but the way that these work, if you haven't been before, is that we do pick a particular topic, pull together a panel, which we've done today, and then pick a subject matter, and then the panel will provide you with tips and expertise on that topic. So we really want and we like these sessions to be informal, and we do try and make them as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring throughout today's session. So as you may have noticed, we do record these sessions, and everybody who is booked onto the session will receive a copy of the recording. So if for any reason you have to unexpectedly leave, or if you want to share this with anybody afterwards, you can do so. And then also, in addition, the recording, along with all of our other Change Chats, will be available on our YouTube page, and we regularly promote them via our LinkedIn pages and other social media. So as I've said, today will be recorded, and it does only pick up those who are speaking. That's just how we set it up. So if you don't want to be recorded and you do have a question, then please just pop it in the chat. So as we get started, today's session is on the psychology of change. And I'm delighted to say that we are joined by the founder and managing director of Trueman Change, Lucy Trueman. So Lucy, before we get into the body of the Change Chat, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody here today?
Yeah, so lots of familiar names. I've got some new ones as well. My name is Lucy Trueman. I'm, as Michael said, the managing director and founder of Trueman Change. I am also an organisational psychologist, and my passion is how do we do change well in a way that puts people at the heart of it. I think that change has been dominated very much by project and program management methodology, and that's not necessarily the best way to do it. So my research is all about how we did change during the pandemic, and I've got a book coming out hopefully later this year. It is in the editing stage. It turns out writing a book is fairly easy, but editing it is painful and awful. So that's taking me a lot longer than I was expecting it to. But that is a summary of the research that I've done over the last 4 years, which is basically all around how did we make change happen so quickly during the pandemic. And what I'm really on a mission to do is bring psychology more into change. I don't think it's in change enough at the moment. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Great stuff. You've touched on it a little bit there, but obviously today's subject is the psychology of change. Sorry, Glyn, just seeing Glyn's question pop up there. It's completely up to you, Glyn. If you'd like to have your camera on, or if you'd like to have your camera off, it's completely up to you. We won't be picking on anyone who doesn't or does not, who does and does not have the camera on. So yeah, moving back to the first question of today. So I know, like you say, you've touched on it a little bit then, but please can you explain why we have chosen the psychology of change as today's Change Chat topic?
Yeah, so change management. So my experience of change, I work predominantly in local government and pretty much almost exclusively in the public sector. And my experience on a practical level of doing change in the public sector is that it's very, very dominated by project and program management methodology. And I'm not saying at all that we don't need that. And I wouldn't want anybody to leave this call thinking we don't need project management. We absolutely do. But I think what's really worth reflecting on is the history of how that came about, and how project and program management is fundamentally an engineering-based discipline. So Gantt charts are named after an engineer whose surname was Gantt. And PRINCE2 stands for projects in a controlled environment, where basically if you're building a bridge, it's really important everything's done in the right order, to budget and on time, and to a very detailed specification. Getting people to change the way that they work is not a controlled environment as much as we like to pretend it is. And it is not something that's always entirely predictable. So I think what's happened over the years is we've brought project and program management in because it gives us that sense of safety and that sense of structure. We've then realised that there is something missing, which people often call the people side of change. And that's where change management as a discipline started to started to grow. The thing about change management as a discipline is a lot of the popular change management tools, and I'm not dissing all of them, and actually our next change chat a month from now is about change management tools, but a lot of them were designed by consultants. And, speaking as one, what a consultant really wants to do is come up with a nice, clean model that they can then replicate with many, many organizations, because that's cost effective and cheap. But again, I feel like we're not quite doing justice there to how people really think and behave and operate in the workplace. So my academic passion has always been psychology. So although I've worked in quite kind of practitioner roles, my degree and my master's was in psychology. And I think that we can take a lot from that field of really starting to understand how people's minds work and how people think and how people behave in the workplace, and start to bring some of that into how we manage change. So that is why this topic, because I think that it's something that we don't perhaps give enough attention to. And there really is an absolute wealth of research and information and studies and models out there in the world of psychology that has been studied in the field of the workplace that's really super relevant, that perhaps when we are on that treadmill of, right, we've got a project plan now, we've got a change plan, that we're not necessarily tapping into. So yeah, that's why this topic.
Great stuff. You touched on there your masters, and you've touched on your book as well that's coming out. Do you want to give a bit of an overview on, without giving too much away about the book, obviously, but do you want to give a little bit of an overview about what you found as part of that and how that teases into today's subject?
So what I find what I found very inspiring during the pandemic, and some of you on the call may know, I lost my dad to COVID right at the start of the first lockdown. So really early on, 3rd of April 2020, my dad died. And I think part of a therapy for me was I needed to find some way to engage with the world without it being this horror of COVID, which at that time I think we've all perhaps compartmentalized a bit, but at that time we were all in a real state of fear about COVID. And the most positive way that I could engage with it was, well, actually, there is some positive stuff here. And because of my professional background being around change, there was this curiosity of a huge, phenomenal amount of changes happening in workplaces right now in this gigantic field experiment, where we're not using any of those predictable, traditional project program management, change management tools. And so what started out as me having some initial curious conversations of, okay, so tell me what's happening, how is this happening, then escalated. And as it happened this week, while I've been editing my book, I've gone back and summarized all of the change chats that we did during 2020, 2021, during that time, to really pull out some of the findings and the stories and examples there. And it started with these. It started with change chats where we were just getting people together and saying, what's happening? How are we doing this so quickly? We've never been able to do this so quickly before. That then led into my master's and my research, and I am going to be doing a PhD next year, continuing that research of, are we thinking about change wrong? Are we thinking about it in this predictive, programmatic way, when actually it's much more about navigating tensions, it's much more about understanding motivations, it's much more about understanding what resistance is and why it's there, thinking about things like senses of identity, of how we craft people's jobs. There's just a wealth of research out there that has been done, not necessarily connected to COVID, that explains why it was possible for things to happen so quickly. And so the book is about, okay, so what are those things? So if you're now going to be leading change going forward, rather than default back to setting up a program and a PMO, yes, you will still need to do some of that because we've got to have some structure. However, should that be in the driving seat, or is that just something that supports us on our journey? What should be in the driving seat? And in my view, that is people and how their brains work and how they operate and how they think. And if you tackle that at the center of your change instead of on the periphery, that's how you make change happen much quicker.
Right. So you mentioned there around people and the psychology of change in regard to people. Do you want to kind of touch on that a little bit more and talk about some of the common challenges that kind of come up in looking at psychology in people?
So the most common thing that's talked about in change management is resistance. And it's one of the things. So there's a really good paper by somebody called Stoughton. It was not just Stoughton that did it. It was a group of people where they basically looked at 10 different change management models and looked at what they had in common, what they didn't have in common, and where there was some psychology backing. And it was really, really mixed, which really highlights that point that I made, that change management as a discipline wasn't founded based on research. It was founded based on consultancy. Now, what they said that they did have in common was this sequential approach. Now, that doesn't mean that that's right. It just means that we had a flurry of change management tools developed all at once. So things like your Kotter's approach to change, there's a Bridges transition approach. There's several where ADKAR is quite a popular one, where what we've tried to do is create this predictive approach to change. Now, they're not terrible. And when you dig underneath some of that, there is some research. So things like some people called it a case for change, some people called it a burning platform, but having a reason to do change, actually there is some backing of that. And COVID was a really, really good example of that. But this concept of it being this predictive journey, I don't think it is. And we've not found anything. What that paper did was they looked for the things that they had in common. Another thing that they all have in common is it's really important to engage well. Now, again, they might have come up with that from the consultancy model perspective because it feels intuitively right, and it certainly is in my practice right. But there are reasons for that. So one of the reasons for that is we have something called self-determination theory in psychology. And what that talks about is that it's really important that people have a sense of mastery, so they feel like they're getting better at their work, they have good relationships with the people that they work with, and they have a sense of autonomy. So when you look at that through the lens of change, actually co-production and engaging with people meets those needs. It enables people to feel engaged and have relationships with others. It enables people to feel a sense of autonomy because they are shaping that change, and it enables that sense of mastery. So I feel like some of the stuff that we do in change management sort of accidentally aligns with some psychology things, even though those two things have not been looked at together at the same time. And so what I'm really on a mission to do in the next stage of my research is really start to find more of those nuggets of where we know there is a reason why that works, or there isn't really a reason and I'm not sure that does work. So it's that sense of let's use this wealth of knowledge about organisational psychology that we have available to us, and let's try and dig into that and find out, okay, well, how can we translate that into, I'm a change manager, I'm working in an organisation, what do I do? Without getting too geeky at the practice end, if you will. And please do, as Michael said, any comments or questions, or if you have a change issue that you want to ask about, then please do. This is a very interactive call. It's not scripted, as you can probably tell, because I'm probably going off in 20 different directions at any given time.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you say there. And you know, one area that we do find when we go in and we work with local authorities during periods of change is that they're struggling with the workplace identity. What insights can you offer on addressing concerns relating to workplace identity during transitions?
So identity is massive, and it's something that I'd really like to delve into a lot more. So firstly, that people's sense of identity to their workplace differs. And you really see this playing out if you ask people the question. So if you met somebody, you know, in a social environment and they asked you, what do you do? What would you say? So some people, their sense of identity is attached to their profession. So some people would say, I am a doctor, I am a nurse, I am a social worker. For some people, they attach it to the place that they work. So they may say, I work at such and such hospital, I work at such and such council. Some people, they attach it to their team. So they might say quite specifically what they do. and what team they are in. And the reason why this is important is because certainly in the public sector, and I imagine in sort of mergers and acquisitions, this happens a lot in the private sector too. But when you start playing with people's sense of identity, so if you're doing something like, I don't know, setting up an arm's length organisation, or you're bringing an arm's length organisation back in house, or you're setting up a shared service, or there's loads of work we've done with merging health and social care teams, you are toying with a sense of identity there. So having a really good understanding of what that means to people is really, really important, because it's something you can kind of blindly play with, and then it doesn't feel right. And people say things like, well, the culture's not right and the culture's not moved on. So I think that identity is a really important issue. The other bit of research that's really interesting about identity is from an equality and diversity point of view. So there is some research to say that when people join an organisation, if they feel that they are in the minority, whether that's based on gender or sexual orientation or race, whatever that's based on, that they will water down their own personal sense of identity in order to fit in. And that long term can have quite a negative impact on that person. So it's another thing to think about with, and I'm not by any stretch an equality and diversity expert. I would go as far to say I've not met anyone who is. I think that it's something that as a society we have absolutely not nailed. But it's just, again, something that's worth thinking about from people's personal identities. And other research around identities can be around motherhood. So when people before women have babies, and their sense of identity in the workplace, and how then when they go off and have maternity leave and they come back, it can really fundamentally make a shift in their sense of identity of I am a nurse or whatever versus I am a mother. So people are often navigating competing senses of identity. So I don't have like a hot tip for change other than just pay a little bit of attention to it. Just think about the change that you're making and how that might impact identity, because it's something that's often very unsaid, but does go quite deep and can really fundamentally impact our well-being if we're not getting it right.
Well, that's great. Thank you. We've had 3 questions while you were answering that question. So the first is from Lindsay. How do we manage change when goals may be unclear or there is a difference of the prioritization of goals?
So I would say do the absolute best you can to get that clarity, because so there is something called goal setting theory that talks about how to set good goals. And it's one of them theories that when you read about it, it kind of feels a little bit like stating the obvious for those of you if you've been in the workplace for a long time, because it's really, really instinctively right. And that is involving people in their goals, making sure that they're clear what their goals are and having like a sense of stretch to their goals. And for my research, a really big finding for how we made change happen so quickly during pandemic was that sense of clarity. So for years, organizations have been talking about things like we need to be more flexible, we need to be more agile, but nobody really knew what it meant. And then all of a sudden what it meant was everybody has to work from home by Monday. And that changing clarity of that goal enabled the IT people to be like, okay, this is what we need to do. The managers to be like, okay, this is what we need to do. The people that it was impacting, this is what I need to do. So at the risk of not answering your question, and I know it's very challenging because I work in local government where honestly the breadth of what local government does is massive. So I totally get that competing in prioritization of goals. But from a change management point of view, the clearer you are, the better. And another way of getting really clear on goals is a really simple question that I personally think is the fundamental of all change management, which is what will be different? If you can answer the question, what will be different, from multiple perspectives, whether that's your staff, your partners, your customers, your resident, whoever it is, answer it from multiple perspectives. People understanding what will be different for them is a form of clarity that enables them to get ready for that change.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Lindsay, if you want to come back with anything to that, then please let us know. We've had a question from Zainab. This is quite a deep one. Is change a perception of our mind, or is it a feeling we feel?
I don't know. I don't know. It's definitely got feelings. So it's probably both. It's definitely got feelings. And there is a really popular change tool called the change curve, which actually is our most viewed video, even though the video I made about the change curve was 4 years ago. We still get like 200 views a month on it. It's not a tool that I massively use because I think, well, first of all, it came from not from change, it came from studies around grief and people being told they were terminally ill. So I think there's a big fundamental question about whether we apply those findings to a workplace change. That feels like a leap. And the other thing I have an issue with is that it presents it as if it is a sequence of emotions that everybody goes through at the same time, which is not the case at all. But what is powerful about it is it does trigger emotions. Now, why change triggers emotions? I don't fully know. I think some of it is down to, the old-fashioned Maslow's hierarchy of need, which is that sort of fundamental, if your livelihood is damaged, that has an emotional impact on you. We are animals and we have a desire to feel safe. And although, somebody making a change to your work isn't actually going to kill you, it does attack that sense of security sometimes of, well, what if I don't like it, and what if I can't, what if I get made redundant, and all of those things. So I think it does absolutely trigger emotions, and I think it would be naive to pretend it doesn't. However, I do think it is in our mind as well, because it's on the change curve, one of the parts that you go through is this sense of bargaining, which is your brain's way of making sense of what change is going to happen. So both would be my gut feel answer to that, but I don't have any sort of references to back that up. But I would say it's both, and I think if you treat it as both, that's a good. You'd probably doing a good job as a change manager.
Right. We've had a question from Cheryl as well, and this goes into the sense of identity area that we were touching on before. How do you think different generations play into sense of identity, e.g., millennials, boomers, etc.? Without generalizing, is this something we have been discussing, and then how that impacts engagement with people?
So there was a tutor on my master's that did that basically her whole research was around this. And she had some really interesting findings in that some of these labels are not they can be generalizing, and that's not necessarily helpful. One of the things that she said is that people over 50 are the happiest cohort of people, which really goes against this kind of boomer, and also when people get older, they become somehow more miserable. It really flies against that, when actually the research shows the opposite, which does make sense to me, to be honest, because I'm 43 and I feel like I'm getting happier the older I get. So I feel like the future's bright for me. But so I think there is a risk of generalizing. However, it almost doesn't matter, because the concept of identities is it's what you feel about yourself. It's what you identify as an individual. So if you're coming into the workplace feeling I am a millennial, therefore X, Y, and Z, it actually doesn't matter if you're coming into the workplace saying, well, I've got blonde hair, therefore X, Y, and Z. The fact that there's no science behind it doesn't really make that much difference. What I do think is different, and this isn't necessarily about identity, although could touch on it, is I do think that different generations have different expectations of the workplace, and that does stack up. The evidence does stack up around that. So, there was, in older generations, there was much more of a drive towards security, get a job for life. Whereas we're seeing a massive uptake in the gig economy and people that are happy to take risks and be self-employed, but wanting more fulfillment. And I do think values change in generations. I don't think there's some magic line that if you're under this year, you're this type, and you're over this year, you're this type. But I do think there are trends in that people seem to be focusing more now. Younger people focus on a sense of purpose more, and they will look at things like corporate social responsibility, which perhaps older generations, when we were that age, wouldn't necessarily have done. So there are trends and patterns. I think it's just about open conversations. And if you're in an organization where that, oh, you're a boomer, you're a millennium is getting out of hand, I'd rein that in. But having grown up conversations that maybe the workplace is different for different people. And that did show through in COVID, actually, because when we sort of idolize the whole move to working from home, which, I'm at home now, Michael's at home. So we're very much a home-based organization, but that had some impacts. The experience for me as somebody that owns my own house and it's big enough that I've got a room where I can have an office, compared to the experience of somebody that's 17 and it's their first job and they're doing it, on their bedroom, sat on the bed trying to work because they don't have that space. So there definitely is different experiences related to age, for sure.
Great, thank you. We've just had a comment from Susanna as well, who's highlighted the SCARF model, which shows some structure, including identity. I don't know if that's one that you've picked up on.
Yeah, it is, and there is lots of models, and I'm sure we'll talk about leadership. There's lots of leadership models out there that will touch on elements of psychology, for sure. I think we're teetering it on the edges, but not necessarily leading with it at the moment.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to leadership now. So, what theories are available that offer guidance on how leadership should be approached when an organization is undergoing change?
So, there is a lot of leadership stuff out there, and there is I don't think we've nailed it. I really, really just don't think we've nailed it. And I feel like that is a really unpopular opinion, because there are a lot of people out there that will pick a particular type of leadership, so situational leadership, transformational leadership, and be like, this is the way to do leadership. What's interesting, if you pull out of that and look at the history of leadership studies, so it's quite a comical history almost. So it started off with the view, academically, this is speaking, not just sort of pop psychology, that leadership was some sort of gift bestowed upon you, and quite religious connotations. So it was, people that were religious were leaders, which now in the world that we live in, we look back at and think that doesn't really feel right. It feels like it's not necessarily related to which, if any, God you believe in. Then there were lots of studies done around traits of leadership, and that was sort of in the 19th century, where we had this sort of what is it that makes somebody a good leader. But when I say traits, they were even looking at things like height and weight and appearance, and which again seems a bit crazy to us now, and obviously failed. And they then started to look at skills in the kind of mid-20th century, which feels like it was getting more in line. But again, from looking at it from a sort of feminist perspective, you can imagine that a lot of the skills around leadership at that time, it was very much wedded to masculine traits, not feminine. When you look at that journey of us like really unpicking and trying to find what is the magic ingredient that makes somebody a good leader, it seems quite naive now, very simplistic, very reductive, and it's almost as if leadership is a fixed thing, when actually leadership is much more about your ability to react to the given situation, which is where things like adaptive leadership and situational leadership have come through and become much more popular. I will never forget, and this is a really controversial thing to say, but it really sat with me. In my master's, there was an essay about transformative leadership, which when you look at it, it's about working with people, transforming the way they think. It is all the good stuff. And it's about having a purpose and changing people's minds and empowering people. And we got really into this, and you really think this is it. And then there was this question posed to us as students, which was Hitler a transformational leadership? And the gut-wrenching answer was actually, yeah, he had a sense of purpose. He changed people's minds. He led people in a direction. So there is something, I think, that's dangerous about this tendency we have to glorify leadership. And we actually need to start thinking about things like ethics a lot more. which I think academically we are doing. I'm not sure that's translated into the real world yet. But, you know, this obsession of, we have some people that have this magical ability to change minds and lead people, I think is dangerous. And we do have this sort of, and we still do it. We still hold up certain characters like Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and we obsess over why are they so good? And actually, are they even so good? We don't know that they're so good. So yeah, leadership, I feel like, is a very long answer for me to say, no, I don't buy into any particular model of leadership. There are certain theories and ideas that I find interesting. One that I throw around a lot at the moment is something called polarity management, which is the study of how do managers cope when they have two opposing forces. So this might be interesting to the person who asked the question about competing priorities. And this came out a lot in my studies in my research around COVID, was it became less about, right, we have a process we have to follow, and much more about, okay, I've got two competing tensions here. I'm a public sector organisation and I have to have some element of governance, even though we're in an emergency situation, but also I need to be able to act fast. How do I do both of those things? Now, that concept of taking two polar opposites, tensions, and thinking about how you are able to do both of them, I think is a really powerful tool, because it builds a muscle of nuance, which I think is what's really important at the moment. The world is changing extraordinarily fast. You know, again, if you look at history of the difference between, 100 years at any point in history compared to the difference between how we live now to 100 years ago, because of the speed of technology, it really is. We can't keep up. So leading change is no longer, in my view, a project that has a start and an end. We all have to be able to adapt and change all the time, which means that reading situations and nuance and being able to navigate opposing tensions is a really, really important skill. But in terms of what is the best leadership model, it's whatever works at the time that you need it to work, and it will never work forever. And as a leader, you will always have to be challenging yourself of how you do better. I think that is the honest answer.
Great. Thank you very much. We've had another question, this time from Ben. I have recently moved into the OD/HR service from a different directorate. I am currently finding some challenges in terms of defining the differences between OD/cultural change, their focus for change being on HR policy, restructures, etc., compared to change management in the sense you are discussing today. Do you find this a usual challenge in local authorities?
Yes. So one of the things I really enjoy playing with as a sort of thought exercise is that we have these multiple different professions. So we have project management, which, as I said, is this sort of engineering basis. We've got change management, which is the consultancy route to adding on to the project management. HR, and again, this is controversial, so don't come at me, HR people, but HR was set up as a function to mitigate risk of the organisation being sued. That's what HR was set up to. I'm not saying that's all HR does now. OD is about that kind of design piece. So you've got all these different professions, and then you've got your leadership within your service areas in local government that will have their own cultures and ways of working. And they're not, all those people really should be aligned, but they're not, because they come in at things from different perspectives. OD that's focusing on HR policy and restructures, etc., those are functions that need to be done, absolutely. So I'm not saying that they don't need to be done. However, playing with structures and policies alone will not change culture. So the best definition of culture that I've come across and that we live and breathe by at Trueman Change is that culture is how messages are moved around the organisation. So when we want to look at culture, and it comes from the work of somebody called Edgar Schein, who was like the godfather of culture. And then somebody whose first name I can't remember, but surname was Taylor. It might be Carolyn or Caroline. Developed it into a slightly more simple framework that you can use for mapping. But basically, if you go in with that definition of culture is about messaging, you then can find the messaging and where they're contradicting themselves. So look at systems and processes because they are sending messages. If you tell your team, we want you to work really efficiently, but then they've got to go through an IT system that's got 15 different stages to it, you're contradicting messages. Your structures do send a message because it sends a message about power and where that lies. Behaviour sends a message. The way that we run meetings sends a message. The posters that are on the wall sends messages. So by looking at culture from that wider perspective, you will get a much richer picture as to what the culture of your organisation is, and then you can design change around that culture or adjust that culture as you see fit. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I feel aggrieved to comment too much on what your OD people should be doing because, you know, it sounds like they're busy enough. But I think that it's sometimes focused on the output of a restructure rather than the fundamental change. Now, where the responsibility for that fundamental change sits is a question for each organisation. Some people have a change team, some people have transformation leads, some people give that responsibility to the services that are to the sort of directors of the services. But yeah, that hopefully that sort of history of where those different professions come from, and sometimes just an open conversation about those history and that contradiction can help people to be like, oh yeah, that's why you think this way and I think this way. But if we join up together, we can really make some progress. Hopefully that does help.
Yeah, Ben's replied and says it does, thank you. And yeah, we've also had a comment from Sophia who said, yes, I've had a similar struggle getting them to understand there is change management versus policies, etc., attached to organisational change. I worked alongside them and eventually over a period we defined the two areas. It was a struggle.
I can imagine. And, you know, the way to rise above some of this is, at the risk of repeating myself, that fundamental question, okay, what will be different, really does rise above it. Because the answer to what will be different might be, oh, well, we'll need a different policy and we'll need a different structure, but we'll need our leaders to behave this way and our customers will experience this differently and our relationship with our members will be different because of this. So that is a powerful tool, whichever angle you're coming from, whichever professional background you're coming from. I honestly think that if you can answer what will be different from multiple perspectives and then figure out how to help people make that transition, that's what change management is. It might not be a process, it might not be a change impact plan, it might not be a readiness assessment, but that having done that thinking and preparing people for that thinking is what change management is. And anybody can do that thinking regardless of their background. And actually having multiple people from different backgrounds doing that thinking shared together is really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. And Ben, if you do want to have a conversation with either of us, please feel free to get in touch and we're more than happy to do so. So multiple times today, and you've just touched on it then, and actually Sophia has mentioned it in her message, is engagement and the importance of engagement. So how does engagement fit in when looking at the psychology and change across a whole organisation?
So we don't like having no control over things that are done to us. That's a pretty basic thing, and it comes through in various different theories. I touched on goal setting, where I said part of it is to do good quality goal setting. You set those goals with the person, so that they have some say. We touched on the self-determination theory, which is the whole make sure that people have got that mastery, that autonomy, and that engagement, which again comes back to that autonomy is really important. We touched on identity, how you identify does impact what it is that you are bringing to the table in terms of how ready you are for change. So it runs through the need for people to be part of shaping it, runs through everything. And even in my research about the pandemic, where actually you could argue engagement was more challenging because we were working from home and people had less contact, people's sense of engagement shot up, communications shot up, conversations shot up. So people, you know, we had this mandate from the government of we've all got to shut up shop by this date. But in terms of how local authorities responded to that, it was very wide. Okay, let's get all our partners together. Can we work with the local football club to set up a food bank from there because it's bigger and so we can socially distance? Can we work with local charities to make sure that we're getting support to people that need it? So the level of engagement and collaboration during the pandemic shot up. So engaging with people is really, really important, and honestly, countless. There's another one, another theory called job crafting, which is about how you basically it's like a proactive behaviour where you enable employees to craft and shape how they do their work. And just by doing that and enabling people to have a bit more say in how they go about their day-to-day business, performance goes up. So there's just lots of different ways in psychology which touches on engagement is really important. On a practical basis, I think that I'm probably preaching to the converted if most of you are in the public sector. Most of you will have experienced that firsthand. Most people have been through a change programme that they felt was done poorly, and it was probably felt done poorly because there was a lack of engagement, or there was trust issues, or people felt that decisions were being made behind closed doors. All that links to that transparency and engagement piece. But also I'm seeing a real increase in organisations, and I think this was starting before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has escalated it in getting better at engaging with the public, because people are really starting to acknowledge that, particularly with costs having come down so much in the last 10 years in local government, not able to provide the level of service they were before, therefore setting up good quality commissions, engagement, partnerships with the community and community groups basically helps everyone. So I'm seeing it internally and I'm seeing it externally. But yeah, engagement is really, really important.
Thank you. We've had a question from Laura. So what will be different in speech marks? Would be such a good workshop. Oh, just 1 second, sorry. What will be different would be such a good workshop idea to help people understand change. Are there any resources or tools you have access to or can share?
I'm pretty sure I've made videos about it, so we can dig those out and get them to you. It really is that simple, though. It really is that simple. I've done like a worksheet in the past where it says what will be different at the top, and then it has different audiences underneath, which was just like a PowerPoint slide that we printed out onto A3 so that people could kind of capture. The magic of it is keeping the question that simple and keeping asking it over and over again. So what else will be different? What else will be different? And asking it from multiple perspectives. Okay, what will be different for customers? What will be different for members? It is a brilliant workshop to do to help people get ready for change, because it builds that clarity. It builds that sense of, okay, I now need, it's very coaching style question. So instead of you saying, okay, this is what will be different, by asking the question, okay, this is the change we need to make. So what will be different for you? It really starts to build on that sort of ownership muscle. But yeah, it's a brilliant workshop and something that we use loads. And the other way to use that, although this is quite a challenge, is to force project managers to use it in their reporting. So if you've got a PMO and everybody is reporting, really look critically at those highlight reports. Are they reporting progress or are they reporting process? So what you'll probably find is a lot of your project management reports in a change program are, we've held a meeting, or, we've built a spreadsheet, or it's very much, we've done our PID. It's very much around the process. If you get a bunch of project managers to nail what will be different and start reporting on what will be different, you watch your change speed up radically. But it's a mindset shift, because project managers, obviously Michael is one, but we deliberately try and find project managers that can dance in both worlds of project and change, and they are like gold dust, I will say. But often there's a lot of project managers that are very process driven, so they naturally default to reporting on the process. Get them reporting on what will be different. It's a game changer, it really is.
Thank you. Laura Ann has also said this is really interesting, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So we've had a question from Glyn. Not sure if you know of the 4D, discover, dream, design, and destiny process, but the dream stage is the place where we can ask what will be different and possibly wildly different. It's part of the appreciative inquiry.
Yes, I am familiar with appreciative inquiry and I have heard of that. It's not one I've used though, but I have heard of it. And yeah, I think it would definitely go. I'd actually do it twice though. So I'd do it in your dream bit, but I'd do it towards the end as well, because it's nice in that dreamy space. It's a really good anchor when you're doing your actual action plans and right, we're ready to mobilize. This is what we're doing, which is why I say get your project managers thinking about it, because it's something to pull people back to what will be different, as well as just doing it in that early dream stage. But yeah, it's honestly what will be different at any point is helpful, even when you're in the weeds of it, because honestly, I've seen some really big, expensive change programs totally lose their way on that and, forget even what it is that they set out to do. And I'm sure everybody else on the call has as well. What will be different brings you back to what difference are we making, which is it's a less direct question and potentially more fluffy, but actually very important. It gets people in an outcomes focused mindset throughout the whole process. It's very powerful.
We've had another question from Safia. So this is looking again at the engagement, moving back to that. So channel shift and engaging public / residents can be a struggle. Any advice on this?
I'm going to let you answer that, Michael, because you've just finished up a big public engagement piece, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. So it was just getting the messages out as early as possible and explaining the benefits and what we were looking at doing. So what we've just been doing is a local nature reserve strategy in Leicestershire. And obviously looking at nature, which is a lot of people's forefront of the minds anyway. So what we did was just get the messages out as soon as possible, share the benefits, understand what they were putting forward, how important it was, and how we could take that forward. And what we've done is we got over I think we got 1,200 people who came back to us to complete the survey, with another 400 coming back to us to get involved in face-to-face sessions. So it was a really, really positive way that we did it. And it was just simply get the messages out as soon as possible, let people realize why, because people see surveys and they come out and get put in front of them, and people don't see the benefit of a survey and they don't understand what the use are. So if you're able to get their messages out and say what this will help, that was our main achievement really, and make sure that the voices was heard. That was the main bit of advice that I would give in regard to that.
I also would add to that, at the risk of stating really boring, obvious stuff, but really think through your logistics. So we've had our most successful community and resident engagement when we've done things like partnered up with community groups and met people where they already are. So if there are already groups and resident things set up, go to them. One of the mistakes I think a lot of people make is they want people to come to, to the town hall or whatever it is. Really think about, everything we said about culture, about messaging really applies in engagement. And think about power balance. If you're saying, right, well, we're going to run a session and we want people to come to this session and they're going to have to, get to the town centre, or make it really, really super easy by meeting people where they are. I think that is very powerful. And also thinking about language is really powerful, because like we're all products of our environment, and it's very easy when you're working within a big organization to develop a language that isn't necessarily accessible to residents and the community. So yeah, some of the really boring kind of logistical stuff really, really matters. Things like what time of day are you running it? We've done stuff where we've been out in the evenings and the mornings and the weekends, and it's about really making it super, super easy for people to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate that, we had 14 different district meetings across the whole of Leicestershire, and because we're engaging with farmers, a lot of our events were in the evening time. So yeah, absolutely. We have had a comment from Laura. I have more reflection on your experience from lockdown. I agree partnerships came together so well and worked in really innovative ways, but I do not think this was due to clear guidance and goal setting from central government. Having worked through this managing a frontline critical service, the goals they set changed on a regular basis. Our experience was the change worked well due to the collective experience of working in a worldwide crisis never before seen. Fear and tragedy brings people together.
Yeah, and there's actually a very clear point of that in the introduction of my book, that it is not in any way a reflection of the government, because as somebody that lost somebody to COVID, I'm sure you can imagine I have quite strong views about the way the government handled it. But I think what did happen was in certain moments there was that clarity. So there was the clarity of everybody's got to work from home. One of the things that I found very difficult as a bereaved family member was the constant moving of the goalposts after that. And well, we're allowed out for half an hour. Well, we're allowed to meet one person. All of that was very, very confusing. I totally agree. And I won't get into my personal views on that, as I'm sure you can imagine, as somebody that lost somebody. I think you're right that the fear was a big factor. And back to what I said earlier on about the burning platform, it was a very, very obvious burning platform. And it also, in a lot of ways, brought people closer to the service areas. Because it impacted everybody. So suddenly we were all scared. We were all scared for family members, for ourselves, for income. There were different reasons different people were scared, but everybody was scared. So that absolutely did add to it. Does that mean that we can only do change when we're all scared? I think the answer to that is no. And I also think that only ever doing change under those circumstances. The other research area that I'd really like to get into that I haven't is this concept of change fatigue. Because I don't think fatigue comes from change. I think it comes from the circumstances of which change are happening and how we handle the change. Change itself isn't tiring. If you won the lottery, nobody would say to you, yeah, but that's a big change. You need to think about change fatigue. So that is an area I do really want to learn a lot about. But I think there's still learnings, even though it was a time of such high stress, of what can we take from that without taking the high stress. And there were fundamentally different ways of doing change that we did that I think you could apply in a normal change program for sure. But yeah, it was a very, very difficult time, and I'm certainly not pro-government in any way, shape or form, as professional as I'm trying to be at this particular moment on this call with lots of people on it.
No, thank you. We've got about 8 minutes left. So if anybody has any remaining questions, please drop them in the chat. So the 52 minutes have been really, really interesting, Lucy. And I think probably just how can we help? What can we do at Trueman Change to help people who are struggling in this kind of area?
So there's different ways that we can help. So there is lots of resource on our website. If you have a look on the insights section of our website, there's loads of videos. If you follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn, I am going through a phase at the moment. We'll see how soon I do it, how long I do it for. And I actually didn't do it last week because my marketing person was on leave. I would like to say because I was on leave, but our marketing person was on leave. But I do a video every Friday where I pick any kind of psychology concept and do a quick 3-4 minutes on this is what this concept is, this is how it would land in a changing environment in the workplace. But in terms of what we do, we can be a delivery partner, so we can help provide change, help with resource, because resource is an issue a lot of organisations do struggle with. But we also can do facilitation and training. So if you wanted, some time with your middle managers or your senior people on how do we do change well, then that's certainly something that we can help with. We do service reviews and we do a lot of culture change work as well. I am currently, this is the first time I've said this publicly, I've just realised, but I'm currently setting up a second business, which is going to be running conferences and events around change. It's literally just gone live on Company's House this week, and we've just hired a web person. So I haven't got anything to share with you that you can go to, but it's called Reimagine Events. And we're going to run events in different sectors and places where we bring some of this psychology, people, human-driven approach to change, and facilitate people to bring their problem that they're working on and use some of these tools on the day. So it's not really a conference where you sit and listen, it's a learning event, and then take those back into your working environment. We're aiming for our first event to be in April. If you would like to be added to our list of people that as soon as we've got a date for that, then just drop me an email and I can make sure that we let you know. Or if you'd like to input into the shaping of that, if you've got any ideas about how that could work, then we're literally just in the process of setting that up. But yeah, we can come and help. We can do facilitation. We can, provide extra resource. It's really just, it's different for every client, really. We don't have models that we drop on. We come in and listen to you and figure out which part it is that you need help with. And hopefully, if I can get over the ordeal of editing, it's so awful, honestly. It's really easy writing because I did the whole ethos of just there. Don't worry about it later, and now it's later. And it's actually not that good. So yeah, the editing of the book is grim, but I am still aiming for that to be getting out later this year or early next year, certainly before the first Reimagine event, because it'd be nice to have that there. But yeah, those are the ways that we can help.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. We haven't got any questions. Any further questions have come in the chat, so I will bring this to a close. So just want to say thank you again, Lucy, for joining us today and sharing her expertise. Also want to say thank you for joining us and thank you for the excellent questions that we've had through today. I've just dropped into the chat the date of our next change chat. At the moment, it isn't on our website, but it will be within the next couple of days. But that is a link to where you can book. So the next change chat is on Friday, the 11th of October, and it's on tools for change. So yeah, we'll be promoting that on our LinkedIn. It'll be on our website, and yeah, please come along if you possibly can. Also, if you've really enjoyed today, we have several more change chats available on our website, such as comms and engagement, which was an engagement with such a big topic of conversation today, even down to housing, service reviews, household support fund, a number of different topics. And yeah, so for next steps, as I mentioned, you will receive an email which will have the copy of the recording, and that should come to you maybe next week. And then if anybody would like to have a chat with either Lucy or myself, please feel free to drop us a message and you can do so. And yeah, if we've got no further questions, some lovely messages coming through. Just want to say thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at a future Change Chat. Thank you.
Do feel free to add us on LinkedIn as well, because I do post a lot of my videos there. So do feel free to send an invite.